This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Do you ever have a story that you just can't get out of your head?
One that you play the details of over and over with your friends?
Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan.
And this is Justice Pending,
a weekly true crime podcast where we discuss tantalizing crimes with more questions than answers.
Hey everyone, Claire here. Before we dive in, we want to acknowledge that this is a difficult anniversary for a lot of people. It's been 5 years since Lauren Dumolo vanished without a trace from Cape Coral, Florida.
Yeah, 5 years and still no answers, no arrests, no remains, just a family holding on to hope, and a case that never got the attention it deserved.
In this episode, we're going to walk through Lauren's story, who she was, what happened in the days leading up to her disappearance, and why this case continues to raise questions about the investigation, about the people around her, and about the justice system itself.
And we should say right up front, this case is layered. There's trauma, there's mental health, and there's a lot of pain. But it's also a story about a woman who mattered, a daughter, a sister, a mother, and she deserves to be found. And we'll go into a lot of detail today about this case, but if you want the full deep dive, we recommend you check out a podcast called Complicit, A True Mystery. It's a season entirely dedicated to Lauren Dumolo's disappearance with a lot more, including interviews with people close to her and the case.
I can't recommend that podcast enough. It was one of those that I remember listening to and just binge listening. Like I had to know what was coming next. So I hope our listeners will check it out.
Yeah, it's packed. It's packed full of information.
It really is. So let's begin with who Lauren was, not just what happened to her, but the life she was trying to build.
So Lauren Dumolo was 29 years old when she went missing back on June 19th, 2020. She was living in Cape Coral, Florida at the time. She's originally a New Yorker, moved to Florida to be closer to her family.
Yeah, her family had kind of encouraged the move. She'd had a rough few years, some ups and downs, including struggles with addiction, custody battles, and relationships that weren't always healthy. But by all accounts, she was trying to do better. She was going to job interviews. She had goals.
Yeah. And, we've learned that she was also deeply spiritual. She was very into meditation, energy healing, that sort of thing. And she had this daily ritual. So every morning she'd walk to a nearby park, nearby to her apartment called Four Freedoms Park. Now put a pin in that name because that park comes up a lot. And it was, again, just a block from her apartment. And she would go there pretty much daily to meditate right by the water there. It's sort of this boat basin that has, like a park for kids and a public little tiny beach there, boats, that kind of thing.
I definitely remember Four Freedoms Park from Complicit podcast. It is I think it's etched in my brain. That
it comes up a lot in that show. Yes.
So Lauren's family and friends describe her as someone who was always smiling and always giving. You get the sense that Lauren was the kind of person who made strangers feel like friends.
And underneath all that warmth, she was fiercely determined to rebuild. She had a daughter and had lost custody of her. And that was one of her driving forces, her biggest goals, regaining custody of her daughter. So that's sort of mentally where she was at the time of her disappearance.
Yeah, we just want to acknowledge, Lauren wasn't perfect. No one is. But she was actively trying to get her life back. She wasn't running from it. She wasn't hiding. She was out in the world, being seen and being hopeful.
And then on June 19th, 2020, she vanished.
So let's talk about the day that Lauren disappeared. June 19th, 2020. It was a Friday, a normal sunny day in Cape Coral.
Yeah, her boyfriend at the time, he comes up a lot. His name's Gabby. He told police that he left their apartment around 6:30 in the morning to go to work. He said Lauren was still asleep when he left in their bed, that he kissed her goodbye, and that was it.
And that's important because we don't actually have any confirmed sightings of Lauren after that. Well, except for one possible sighting. A maintenance worker later told police that he saw Lauren around 8:30 that morning walking near Four Freedoms Park in Cape Coral.
Or else.
Right. And that fits her routine. She often went there, as we know, to do her morning meditation. So this maintenance worker who came forward later, which is why people don't necessarily think that it's a 100% confirmed sighting, he thinks he saw her.
Yeah. And again, it's just a short walk from her apartment. So it's kind of important to note she didn't have a car and she didn't drive. So, I mean, very much a New Yorker in that sense.
Right.
But she had the reason was she had an accident in her teenage years and was a car accident and was scared to drive. So it's not like, she was zipping all over town in a car. No, she was really on foot a lot. And so that also makes sense, if the maintenance worker had seen her walking. But after that potential sighting, there's really nothing, no phone calls, no texts. She is supposed to show up to a job interview, and she never shows for that. She just doesn't return home.
So naturally, her family started getting worried. And that very same day, they, were wondering what happened to her. She had been in daily contact with them. She talked to her dad all the time. But on Friday, it really stood out that no one heard from her.
Yeah. And then came the weekend. So Saturday passed, Sunday passed, nothing. And what really triggered alarm bells for the family was she failed to call her father for Father's Day, which was that Sunday.
Final Days on Earth with Claire Sanama is sponsored by BetterHelp. Working in true crime has shown me the darkest parts of humanity. I take my mental health seriously because I know how much it impacts every other area of my life. I believe that going to therapy shows great strength and is a sign of emotional maturity. This Mental Health Awareness Month, let's encourage everyone to take care of themselves and break the stigma around seeking support. I know I'm glad that I gave therapy a shot and learned the benefits firsthand. It's made a huge difference in my life, and I think it can for you too. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching people with the right therapist from their diverse network of more than 30,000 licensed therapists with a wide range of specialties. Easily switch therapists online anytime at no extra cost. We're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/finaldays to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/finaldays. Missing out on a show that everyone is talking about isn't an option for me. I'm constantly signing up for this streaming service or that one, and then a few months later, I realize I've still been paying for the service long after I finish the show. Getting Rocket Money was a game changer for me. They'll find your unwanted subscriptions and even help you cancel them, so you never have to worry about them slipping through the cracks again. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money will even try to negotiate lower bills for you. They automatically scan your bills to find opportunities to save, then you can ask them to negotiate for you. They'll deal with customer service, so you don't have to. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/finaldays today. That's rocketmoney.com/finaldays. rocketmoney.com/finaldays. So Lauren's father, Paul, said that she never missed calling him on Father's Day. Never. And when that day came and went with no call, he knew something was very, very wrong.
Yeah, so he starts calling around. He is in California, so he's really far from where this is happening in Florida. And remember, this is also COVID. So there's just an added layer of complication
Oh, yeah.
in the middle of all of this. So he starts calling around, trying to get answers. And what he found was that no one had seen Lauren since Friday morning. And that is Gabby's account, of
The
Friday
boyfriend.
morning. The boyfriend. Yeah. So Gabby just kind of plainly said, yeah, she just never came home. But it also sounded to her father like Gabby hadn't made much of an effort to find her either.
And that's something that really stood out to her family, that her boyfriend didn't seem panicked. He told Paul he was going to spend the night at a friend's house. And this is 2 days into Lauren being missing. It seems odd that he would just go out during
Yeah.
this time.
I mean, it's not a good look at all. And he hadn't also filed a missing persons report yet. Gabby locally hadn't filed it. And Paul really pushed him, and he was. If you listen to Complicit, he's like, "You're telling me the woman you love is missing, and you're not staying home in case she comes back." Something to that effect. And
Right.
Gabby didn't really have much to say, and that silence said a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure to her family that's like red flag, red flag. But
Yeah.
it wasn't until Monday that Lauren was officially reported missing. And by that point, crucial time had already been lost. They talk about the first 48 hours, when a person goes missing, being critical. And that's come and gone.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen this time and time again in cases you've covered. Like, it really
Yes.
is a critical. I mean, it's why the show is 48 hours. Like, it's right.
Yes. Yeah. So people, they think that they can't report a person missing if they haven't been gone for that period of time, but that's really that's not the case. Like you can report someone missing, um, with whenever they don't hit their normal routine. You can say they normally, I normally see them at this time and I haven't seen them and I can't get a hold of them. You might run into, a police officer who says, like, well, officially they're not a missing person yet, but you can still get investigative help. And you're also starting that line of communication and starting the record keeping of when they actually went missing. And that's important.
Yeah, and her sister Cassie, and so she has two sisters who live locally, Cassie and Lindsay. And Cassie was all over this from the start. I mean, when I say locally, I mean within the state, so not
Okay.
right there. But Cassie had already contacted the sheriff's department. She was dropped everything en route to go check things out for herself. But it was really everyone was relying on Gabby to file that missing persons.
Yeah.
So he finally does when Paul, kind of threatens him verbally.
Right.
Uh, in the also a New Yorker, Paul is. And so Gabby does, and then just to add fuel to the fire here, the Cape Coral Police Department somehow misfiles the report and a detective isn't assigned because it gets lost in the shuffle. And
Oh
so
no.
even more valuable time is lost even then. So I mean, from the get-go, this case was just so poorly handled.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking just to think something like a clerical error,
Yeah.
it's like no one's perfect, but gosh,
I
that's
mean,
really hard to hear.
yeah, that was super frustrating. But it didn't stop, her family from hitting the ground with posters and things like that. So there is an official investigation at this point. But there's also, an unofficial, just family actively, desperately searching for
Right.
their loved one. Now, something that can't be ignored in this case, we're going to go back in time a little bit, is Lauren's mental health. So, in the weeks before she vanished, she was kind of struggling, and there was a very public incident just 2.5 weeks earlier on June 1st, 2020, that kind of gives some insight into where she was emotionally.
Yeah, this is difficult to talk about, but on June 1st, Lauren was Baker acted. This is Florida's involuntary psychiatric hold. Basically, someone can be taken in for mental health evaluation if they're deemed a danger to themselves or others.
Yeah, so what happened was she had been acting very erratically at Four Freedoms Park, the same park, that she was allegedly last seen and where she went every day. And witnesses say that she jumped into the water to avoid something. Like she was screaming that people were following her, people were after her. And this water is not intended to be jumped into. It is an active boating waterway.
Oh,
So
okay.
pretty, and let's not even forget to mention the alligators and crocodile. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
what wildlife is in that, but this is South Florida, right? So,
Yeah.
so if this is, maybe you wait on the beach, you put your feet in the water, but no one's swimming here. So everyone, was sort of very concerned.
Yeah. And when police and EMS showed up, Lauren actually jumped back into the water again, trying to evade them. So they eventually got her out, but it was clear she was having a serious break from reality.
Yes, and so when this happened, she was held under the Baker Act for a full week, which is longer than the standard 72 hours, because while she was being held, her behavior continued to concern the staff. And at one point, she hit her head on the floor. She had to be taken to another hospital. Then she was brought back, and there was a second injury because she was still acting very erratic. People are concerned there.
And doctors eventually diagnosed her with a brief psychotic disorder. It's a short term condition usually triggered by extreme stress. In Lauren's case, they thought it might have been tied to hormonal changes. She'd actually had an abortion about a week earlier. No drugs were detected, no prior psychiatric history, just a sudden severe crash.
Yeah, and then when she was discharged, so she was discharged on June 8th, so we're still back in time from the date of her disappearance. She was reportedly in better shape. She was more stable. She told her family she didn't want to feel like that again. She was scared of what she had experienced, and she was, all better.
So she was prescribed antipsychotic medication, which was supposed to help prevent a recurrence of, whatever this event was that caused her to jump into the water at Four Freedoms Park. Um, but here's the part that will frustrate you. She never actually took it.
Oh, yeah. Allegedly, she did drop the prescription off at the pharmacy and had asked her boyfriend Gabby to pick it up, and he never did. So she never
Oof.
got it, and I guess
Yeah.
she never went herself to pick it up. But it never happened. She never picked it up.
Yeah, that's so sad because, who has a mental health crisis and gets prescribed medication and then doesn't get it, that it seems like she was so close to getting that help that she needed. Um and if, she wasn't able to pick it up herself, she didn't have a car, she, maybe was still struggling, that would be understandable, but her boyfriend didn't pick it up. That
I know.
sounds like yeah.
Yeah, I know. Now, we cannot for sure say that her disappearance is linked to these events. It's just interesting timing for sure. But yeah, I guess we'll never know what happened had she had she started the medication that she was prescribed.
Right. So just 11 days after being released from psychiatric care, Lauren disappears. And, this is a huge part of the timeline. Like, we have to acknowledge what was going on in her life right around when she disappeared.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's relevant, right, to the
Yeah.
timeline, like you said. It's also something the public seized on early. Some people wrongly assumed she had just wandered off or hurt herself, but her family never bought that. Again, after she was released, she kind of went back to her regular routine. She spoke to her sister, she spoke to her father. I mean, she was in contact daily with people.
Yeah. It sounds like everything, leading up to like after she got out and then to that Friday, they thought they were out of the woods, like that things were, looking up. And her family was adamant. Lauren wouldn't just leave. She had a daughter that she was fighting to get back. She had job interviews scheduled, and she was making plans. She was trying to move forward with her life.
Yeah, and she had just lived through her scariest moment, right? Like she,
Yeah.
told her family she didn't want to feel that way again. It's not like it wasn't like a break that she couldn't remember. It wasn't amnesia. She knew what was happening. She knew that, this was wrong and it was a temporary break and she didn't want to feel that way again. So, the idea that she suddenly harmed herself or just kind of wandered off, it wasn't adding up.
Right. And the more we dig into what happens next, the more questions that we have.
Yeah, so let's talk about her relationship with Gabby. We've mentioned him a few times now. Her boyfriend at the time she disappeared. And we do need to talk a little bit more about that relationship because a lot of people close to Lauren say that it really wasn't healthy.
That's right. So he was 14 years older than Lauren. That's kind of a significant amount of time. Not unheard of, but we're putting out all the facts here. They'd been together a few years, but it was one of those on again, off again relationships with sort of a lot of drama. There was instability, and in the months leading up to her disappearance, it had taken a darker turn.
Lauren had told friends and family that Gabby had hit her. She told one friend it was the first time, when it happened,
Yeah.
but others, like her father and family, didn't necessarily believe that it was the first time. Lauren had called a friend of hers and said that she was scared and she wanted to get out.
Gosh, and even while she's saying those things to a few people privately, she kept up appearances online. And so on social media, she was posting smiling photos, calling him the love of her life. It's one of those things that people find hard to square, but it's not that unusual.
Yeah. And, it's heartbreaking, honestly, because you can feel that inner conflict, wanting things to be
Sure.
okay, maybe believing they could be, or like just not knowing how to leave safely. Her sister, Cassie, after her hospitalization in the mental health facility had driven across, she lived on the East Coast at the time. So she, of Florida. So she had driven across the state and visited with her sister to check on her. Again, her father would have, but this is COVID, the flights and the regulations and the quarantine. I mean, it just wasn't practical. So her sister visited her and reported that she had had a lovely day with Lauren and Gabby at the beach and that they were so in love and everything looked normal. And she was
Wow.
super relieved. And this is like, about a week before her disappearance. So again, it's, kind of talks to the on again, off again aspect, but, you know, just something else to note there.
Yeah. And according to people who knew Lauren, she had said that her boyfriend kept pretty close tabs on her and he would do, allegedly some pretty manipulative things like hide her makeup if he didn't want her to go out or turn off the Wi Fi so she couldn't use her phone. And those are, some pretty big power plays.
Yeah, and they're just like
Yeah.
you think why, and
Well, control. Yeah, it sounds like.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's disturbing, but
it is.
couple that with the fact that he actually did have a record. So we're in Lee County now, which those records are public. And there's a prior domestic violence charge there. So
Yeah.
it seems like this wasn't new behavior.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have something documented like that, it helps to bolster the sort of he said, she said claims that people will often, not take at full value. But if there is a charge, I mean, that's important, and that's something that you know we, we have to talk about. So domestic violence is a really big problem in America, and this is something that I think affects um a lot of people and impacts a lot of crimes. So Lauren had started asking around about available apartments. She told someone she needed to get out of a bad situation. That was, how she had described it. So it appears she was planning an exit. And, that's the kind of detail that doesn't sound like someone, about to walk away from her life voluntarily. It sounds almost like someone trying to start a new one.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like someone trying to get out of a bad relationship. But then something happened before she could.
So, this is why her boyfriend's behavior after she disappeared raised so many eyebrows. He didn't help with the search. He didn't go to Four Freedoms Park. He wasn't putting out flyers. And, according to her friends and family, he was not very helpful at all during this time.
Yeah, he just sort of faded to the background. Police did question him for hours, and it was like he just kind of gave the bare minimum, like she was asleep when I left. That's it. And another interesting detail is that, the family went, to the apartment to look for clues and everything. And one of the things that we'll talk about clues that show up in a minute, but Gabby somehow had her phone,
Hmm.
but her other personal belongings, like, her purse and things weren't there. Like he somehow had her phone and never gave an explanation for having it, which is just something to put a pin in.
Yeah, definitely. People usually keep their phones pretty close, so the idea that somebody else would be in possession of it is,
Yeah. I mean, it could go back to the controlling behavior. Maybe he had
yeah.
just taken it from her. Who knows? But it was just a strange, piece that never was resolved.
Right. I mean, there's no law against being a bad boyfriend, but there's something, unsettling about how little urgency he seemed to have while his girlfriend is missing. It's almost like it's a non-event.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that seemed to influence how others saw Lauren's case too. Like if he wasn't worried, why should they be? So it just
Yeah,
set a bad precedent from the start.
sure. But Lauren's family from the start knew that something was terribly wrong, and they certainly had all the urgency and energy and motivation, to find her in the world.
Yeah. So let's go back to the park now. So we're post disappearance. We're back at the park. Let's talk about that.
All right, so 2 days after Lauren disappeared, on Sunday, June 21st, there was a discovery that really changes the tone of the case.
Yeah, a park goer, again, we don't know who, found Lauren's purse, her shoes, and her keys, like to her apartment, in the grass at Four Freedoms Park. We're back at the park, and
Yep.
this is the place she's last seen, and it's just sitting there. And it, hadn't. Her family had searched. People had been
Yeah.
searching the park, and it was sort of like they were just placed there one day, 2 days later.
Yeah, the timing's really interesting because, like you said, the family went to the park immediately because that's where she, was known to go in the mornings, and so um, it's really odd that it just appears on this Sunday. But let's talk about what wasn't found. Lauren's phone. She has her purse, she has her keys, but the phone is not there.
Yeah. I want to note too here, there's actually two phones in this story, which makes it a
Oh,
little
okay.
more confusing. So her phone that she had been using of late, Gabby had it in his possession. Now that was an old phone that she had disconnected, and she had been using a newer phone, but when she jumped in the water to get away from the people she thought were after her during the psychotic break, she then had her phone and jumped in the water with that phone, lost that phone, and that phone was never recovered. So we don't have, when Gabby handed over her the phone she was using at the time, it didn't have a lot of data on it because it was a
Okay.
recycled older phone that she was, until she could get a replacement that she was just let go, out of the psychiatric ward and happened to have an old phone that she could use on
Okay.
Wi-Fi. Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah,
The
but
phone not being in the purse, maybe we have an explanation for that.
yeah, we could. I mean, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. But
Okay.
also, yeah, Gabby still, did have a phone that she had been using in the days leading up to her disappearance in his
Okay.
possession.
Gotcha. I mean, I guess the biggest question is just why didn't anyone see these items sooner? It's a public park. And, somehow we're thinking that these items sat untouched for, what is it, 3 days?
Yeah, like 2 or 3 days. Yeah. I mean, it really just doesn't make sense, especially when you add in the fact that her family had been searching the area. People, friends, neighbors,
Yeah.
people had been searching that area. They would have noticed them.
They knew, what her items looked like, and even if you don't, just unattended purse kind of stands out, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, it had her wallet in there with her ID, so they knew exactly whose it was.
wow. Wow. Yeah. So let's talk about what happens next. So it's a few days later, June 24th, when Lauren's sister Lindsay makes another discovery. She finds Lauren's red shirt buried in the sand just off the main walking path.
Yeah, so this is a creepy detail. That earlier that morning, the whole family had combed the park again and again and again, especially after, Lauren's things had appeared there days prior. And so, they had been there that morning. I think they left the park to go search somewhere else, maybe have a bite. They came back to the park to search again in the afternoon, and it was just laid out there in the sand, like a little bit covered, but laid out, like someone
Okay.
intentionally put it there for them to discover. And they were certain it was Lauren's. The shirt is then bagged for DNA analysis. It eventually will come back, yes, that it's Lauren's shirt. So again, you have this creepy sort of intentional setting out of clues. Um, and
Yeah,
it
it's
was just
bizarre.
it is, and it's the same shirt Lauren was reportedly seen wearing the day before she vanished by that maintenance man.
Okay. You know, I've heard that the shirt was actually clean, like, it looked like it hadn't been sitting out, um, in the Florida heat and rain, for 5 days, so that's interesting.
Mhm. I know, and I mean, creepier to me is that they had all walked past that very spot.
Yeah.
And that shirt wasn't there. In fact, her father, like, I don't know, a day or two earlier, had set up for a local news interview exactly in that spot,
Wow.
and it wasn't there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So we have Lauren's personal items being found in stages, days apart, all within the same location for Freedom's Park, and they're not being found by police. They're actually being found by, regular people or her own family. So, yeah,
Ugh, I know, and it makes you wonder, like, was someone watching? Was someone trying to send a message? Like, mislead the investigation? I mean,
yeah.
it's a public park, so there are cameras.
Ooh,
And, so her family's like, "Well, just go watch that camera, and,
yeah.
this'll frustrate you." The police don't do that in time, or, and sort of give a story of, "Oh, yeah, you can't actually see, it's like 2 homeless guys." And, her family's like, "Well, A, how do you know they're homeless? B, how do you know they're guys? C,
Yeah.
like, rewind." And so, they I don't know, and the
I feel
footage
like
is gone
yeah.
because,
I thought
like,
you were gonna tell me that the cameras weren't working because that's
oh,
usually what.
yeah, yeah. No, no, no. They're working, but they don't, they refresh.
Yeah.
They're not saving the footage forever. So there's no way to go back. No
Yeah.
one seems to
Unbelievable.
be, yeah. I mean, it just seems like urgency is super lost on at this point.
Yeah, on everyone but her family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we still don't know how those items got there. Was Lauren actually in the park on June 19th, or were her things brought there later to create the illusion that she was there?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest mysteries of this case, because instead of answers, these clues, these discoveries only created more questions.
Yeah, and they planted the seed in her family's mind and in ours that someone else was involved and someone who wanted to control the narrative.
Yeah. So now, as a result of all these clues, the police do kind of kick into gear. And there's, always high drama on the TV series. There's a cadaver dog search.
Here we go.
Here we go. So let's fast forward a little bit. About a month, yes, a month after Lauren disappeared, her family is every single day pushing for more action. And that's when Cape Coral Police Department finally bring in cadaver dogs.
Yeah, that is not the timeline that you hope for when someone's missing, that it takes a month. But it's important to note that the dogs started their search and they picked up on a scent almost immediately.
Yeah. So now this is July 20th. So we're a month out. Um, and where they went next shocked everyone. So the dogs led investigators pretty immediately across the street from Four Freedoms Park to an apartment complex, um, to a van parked there, up the stairs to a second floor apartment, whose the apartment belonged to her mother
Oh,
and her
wow.
mother's longtime partner named Victor. Now, let's explain Victor just a little bit here. Victor was Gabby. Yes, that Gabby. Victor and Gabby were work partners in a flooring company. So
Okay.
they shared this work van. The work van was parked in front, under like a carport type thing in front of this apartment complex. And Lauren's mother and Victor lived right across the street from Four Freedoms Park. Lauren was always there, walking back. Lauren used to live in that apartment. So, yes, you would think if this was a regular bloodhound, I guess you call them,
Sure.
searching for an alive person, that would, that would make sense. But these are cadaver dogs.
Yeah, this sounds different. So, I mean, the dogs don't just sniff around. One of them actually lays down in the back of this work van. And for people who aren't familiar, when a cadaver dog lays down, it means that they're alerting on the scent of human decomposition.
Yeah, I mean, they're highly trained.
Yeah,
They're not supposed to mistake human sense for something like a dead animal or trash. And again, that really wasn't the only hit. They led officers up the stairs to her mother and Victor's apartment. So, this is at this point, everyone sort of has their jaws wide open because no one expected the dogs to even get out of the park.
oh, totally. Yeah, I think they go to the park and you think they might, wander over to the lake and stop, right? Or they might just lose the scent in the park. But the fact that they like go off on this very specific path and it leads to a van that was used by her boyfriend and, another family member, that's extremely interesting. So, investigators thought so too, and they searched that apartment. They took a few items into evidence, including a curtain that was hanging in place of the laundry room door. So that's intriguing. And, it reportedly had some kind of stain on it. And yeah, it was taken into evidence.
Yeah, and so was the van. So they did confiscate the van, and sent it for testing and everything the police would do. And you'd think after something like that, multiple hits from trained dogs, the police would really dig in. But instead, what happened next stunned Lauren's family.
Yeah, they actually gave the van back.
I mean, just like that, they returned it, and said, basically there's no usable forensic evidence. They said it checked out because of their line of work. So flooring, demolition, that Gabby and Victor were probably exposed to biological materials that could confuse the dogs. Like if someone had died in an apartment and they ripped up the floor or,
Yeah,
something like that.
that's very interesting. Gosh, you have to think, Lauren's family feels like they're so close with like a really good actionable lead with law enforcement and then suddenly it's like, "Oh, let's just give them the van back. Nothing to see here."
Yeah. I mean, it, it's like laughable kind of because you
Yeah, I
want
mean, you
more.
you laugh, yeah, so you don't cry, right? Because
Yeah.
it's so sad. But let's talk about what happened a few days later.
Yeah. So this, I mean, you can't just have one detail in the case. Like we said at the beginning, it's very layered. So
Yeah.
Gabby and Victor don't work for themselves. They work for a larger company, and they were very close and also friends with the owner of that company, whose name was Oscar, who also owned the van because it was a company van. It was one of Victor's longtime friends, by all accounts. And of course, he, hears that his van is, being towed into a police station for
Right.
like forensic analysis. We don't have any details of those conversations or his reaction to it. And then lo and behold, he is also not also, he's found dead in a
Yeah.
hotel room. And his cause of death was immediately ruled a suicide, and there was never an investigation.
Wow. Well, that's a twist. So
Yeah.
we have we can't find Lauren's body, but now we have a dead body, and it's the owner of the van that the cadaver dogs alerted on as having something to do with Lauren Dumolo. Oh
Mm,
boy.
I know. I mean, talk about a tangent, but
Yeah.
maybe relevant. Who knows?
Right. So, I mean, the timing is just chilling. So, this is the same week that the van was returned. This is all happening really in close succession.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Lauren's family's asking the obvious question that you're probably asking yourself right now. If the dogs picked up a scent of decomposition, why wasn't that enough to keep digging? I mean, let's go back to the van here.
Right. It's a question that still haunts the case because it feels like something big was being overlooked or, dismissed.
Yep. So, Lauren's family's not taking this sitting down. They are still pushing the police, who it's an open investigation. So, of course, they're not getting information because that is, police protocol. So that
Right.
makes sense, but doesn't stop them from, really being loud and out there in the community. And so one thing that really stands out, it's almost like every every time they get their hopes up and disappointment, it only fuels their fire more.
Yeah.
So, it's really one of the things that stands out in this case is how fiercely her family and the community showed up, and they were definitely not going to let her disappear quietly.
Yeah, I mean, I have to ask, did they search the water in Four Freedoms Park? Was that something that the police did?
They did. They sent divers. They sent
Yeah.
the boat. They found nothing. Again, it's an active boating waterway with currents. I
Mm,
mean, no, and you got to think like we know that her cell phone that she was using at the time she jumped into that basin has to be there somewhere. So, I mean, how thorough were they? How buried are things? But
yeah.
no, they never found anything in the water.
Yeah, that's so sad. Um, so, the family's been out there posting flyers, talking to neighbors, organizing searches, and they're not stopping.
No, they're not. And it's not just the family. I mean, people from the Cape Coral community are amazing. I mean, they really rallied around this. Even people that had never met her, it was like this joint effort. I think there's a huge billboard that is like on a bridge when you get into the community where she was. And, that was lit up with her picture and her missing poster. All of a sudden now there are rewards going out, for information. Um, but yeah, they organized a lot of searches. They canvassed the parks. They organized events, the news. There's a local news station there called Wink News, and they were right there the whole time covering every aspect of the story. It was really starting to become public, but really only because of Lauren's family.
Yeah, I remember hearing about a motorcycle ride called We Ride for Lauren that happened just around the 3-month mark of her disappearance in October. And, hundreds of riders showed up, and, it sounds like something that was really special to, her dad.
Yeah, and hundreds of people were there. It was loud, bold. Her dad was a big like motorcycle, like a Harley guy, like a motorcycle
Yeah.
rider. He did eventually get to Florida. So we should back up. He had been there also searching and making noise and talking to Wing News and giving interviews and investigating on his own. And I mean, it's really, brave of him to have, gone into, certain maybe questionable areas and just, I mean, he's, man on a mission. It's amazing how this family has really shown up. But yeah, so they did the We Ride for Lauren, and a few months later in December, they did a We Walk for Lauren. So this was again, like they closed the streets of Cape Coral. The police are showing up,
Wow.
to help. And there's a vigil at one point, and it's really quite public that she's missing. And yet no one is like speaking up, it's just crazy. But They did it all on their own. They didn't wait for permission. And, a lot of the local press has really credited this family with stepping up, stepping into the light,
Yeah.
putting everything about Lauren out there. And, it's the reason that her story's been alive for all these years.
Yeah, so let's jump ahead to October 2021, more than a year after Lauren vanished. For a brief moment, it felt like there might be a break in the case.
Yes. So human remains had been found near a place called Pine Island Road and in Fort Myers. So Fort Myers is not far from Cape Coral. And authorities held this joint press conference. So
I remember this, yeah.
Lee County Sheriff's Office and Cape Coral Police. The way they talked about the discovery, it seems like they believe that these human remains, might be Lauren's.
Yeah, I remember they asked for her dental records, like right there on camera, publicly. So that's not a step you take lightly. That is making that connection really, upfront. And to think that her family's watching that press conference, her friends are following this, and gosh, everyone's just like holding their breath, like, is this going to be Lauren?
Yes, and the time. So again, with the timing being interesting, the timing of this press conference came just a day after Paul Dumolo took to Facebook and went on a rant about how basically inept the Cape Coral Police Department are, criticizing them. I mean, this thing went viral. Viral. And so this was pretty embarrassing for the Cape Coral Police Department. And then he gets a call that night from the chief and was like, "Oh, we found human remains." So the timing was so like, I don't know. It
So,
just
yeah, it
it's
sounds kind of reactive, like maybe they were feeling the pressure and they wanted to give an answer that they didn't actually have yet.
yeah. It it seems, I don't know, convenient. So they hold this less than 24 hours later. They're holding this press conference. By the way, her local family had asked to attend, the press
Yeah.
conference, and were told that they couldn't. So
Hmm.
they'd have to watch it at home like everyone else. So
Weird.
yeah, weird. Um, yeah. So they held this press conference and say they might have found Lauren.
Yeah, and this is just the idea that they have this hope, and then, later that same day, it's completely dashed because the lead detective calls Paul, um, and says the remains aren't Lauren's.
Yeah, even before Lauren's dental records, which were found, by the way,
Mm,
come in, they're announcing it's another woman, not Lauren. Which,
yeah,
you never want to get the call that, yes, we found your daughter's remains, but also you've been waiting for closure. And,
yeah.
it's sort of this double-edged sword, a huge devastating twist either way, because now they're back at square one.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely understand the family's frustration. For a year, they were begging for, this visibility and attention. And when the cameras finally came out, it was for a misidentification, a false alarm.
Oh, yeah. It just felt like a slap in the face.
Yeah.
And they were being asked this whole time, like, trust the process. But no, the police had done nothing to earn their trust, basically. And this high stakes public announcement just made that divide even wider.
Yeah, it sounds, almost unbelievable that would be what, you know, that would be the result, because they had set it up as though, you kind of think maybe you wait to make that announcement until you check the records. If you can check them the same day, they
Yeah.
didn't actually need to come up and do this press conference until they knew who it was, right?
Yeah. I don't know if this is, standard for police or not, but they never actually held a second press
Press conference.
conference. They never actually held a second press conference to announce that it wasn't Lauren. So I just thought, like, them even closing the loop to the public was strange. Not closing the loop to the public was
Right.
strange. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So at this point, it's early 2022, and Lauren has been missing for over a year and a half. The family's done everything they can do on their own, and they need more help.
And that's when they bring in a group called Missing in America. So this is an organization that helps search for missing people. It's kind of like a mix of volunteer advocates and retired law enforcement, but they're really serious about what they do.
Yeah, very serious. So they're led by like a retired homicide investigator, and they have a reputation for getting results.
Yeah, it's the team is led by Nancy Schaefer and Joe Fanciulli. Joe actually has his own podcast. I believe it's called The Donut Shop Murders. So
Nice.
yeah, so he's, and he's been around the block a lot. So they came in with fresh eyes. They immediately started reviewing everything. Went to the park, looked at the apartment, brought a metal detector, um, they did everything again, basically.
And they found something, right? In a wooded lot near Lauren's apartment. So this is an area that had been overgrown back in 2020, but at this point in 2022, it had been cleared out.
Yeah, and they discovered what apparently had been missed, a buried piece of carpet, like a carpet you'd find in a van, with the seat cutout still in place. And then
Okay.
under that was a shower curtain and two latex gloves.
So, these are professionals, right? So once they found this, they immediately called law enforcement and, stopped what they were doing. And so, to the credit of the new detective on the case, he showed up quickly and, called in a CSI unit.
Yes. So now I just want to note there's a new detective at this point on the case, which does show movement, in the
Yeah.
Cape Coral Police Department. So good. And he apparently was really communicative. Paul Dumolo really liked him. He was taking late night calls. The family kind of at this point finally felt like someone was listening. So that was a nice turn of events there.
Yeah, so I mean that definitely is positive, but what about the fact that this lot had supposedly been searched before, back in 2020? And reportedly the carpet was there back then too, but no one had lifted it up.
Yeah, that detail really sticks with me because it's not just what you see, it's like you don't bother to look deeper. I feel like that's a theme in this investigation. Like no one's gone
Yeah.
deeper. Um yeah, it's just something hard to ignore on such a now public, very public, locally public case.
Yeah, so I mean, we're about to go into a new phase of this investigation, plot twist. So just when you think this case can't take any more turns, along comes, something completely unexpected. Let's talk about Wade Wilson.
Wait, yeah. So this is a more recent turn of events.
Yes.
Like very recent. So like now we're in, 2023 here. There's a guy named Wade Wilson, and he is sitting in jail for a double homicide in Lee County in Cape Coral. Um, and yeah, he's sort of become famous locally for his own crimes, his own issues. He is ironically the murderer of Lauren's sister's coworker. I mean, just the
Okay.
connection in this case is
Yeah.
it's interesting. But yep, let's talk about Wade Wilson.
So, yes, he's been charged with multiple murders in Lee County, and he's inserted himself into Lauren's case.
We didn't even really learn about him until, like you said, he inserted himself, because he wasn't on anyone's radar allegedly. I mean, not that there were certain suspects that had been, I want to say, made public, because a very famous news station made them public. But Wade came out of nowhere, and he sent a series of letters to local news station NBC2. And in them, he claimed to have information about what happened to Lauren, and he even named names. He claimed there was a wider network involved, and he made references to a large scale cover up in this case.
I mean, there's one way to get attention and get yourself on the local news, right? So, it's a letter that on the surface might sound like a publicity stunt, but what caught people's attention was the level of detail. He actually knew things about Lauren's case that hadn't been made public. So that made law enforcement and Lauren's family pay attention.
Yes. Now, let's just be clear here. Wade Wilson is not what you'd call a reliable narrator. He's volatile. He tried to escape jail not long after those letters were sent. His own attorney ended up recusing himself. There are taped phone calls with his girlfriend at the time, where he admits to the murders he committed, knowing, I would assume, knowing that his phone calls from jail were being recorded, but then
Right.
goes on to say, no, someone else did it and I'm being framed. I mean, so, you don't know with this guy.
Right. I mean, we got to talk about it because it's so bizarre.
Yes.
And he claims to know where Lauren's body is. He said people close to her were involved, and that like certain officials were looking the other way. And so, I mean, he also like has this slight connection, to Lauren. One of his victims, I think you talked about this before, worked with Lauren's sister at a restaurant. So, the connections are there.
Yeah, like really chilling. So, but it led to another renewed look at the case. I mean, anytime an anniversary comes up, anytime
Yeah.
a clue is revealed, anytime anyone's talking about this case is helpful in a way.
Right.
Um, and so the new detective, took Wilson's letters,
Yeah.
investigated them. We, at this point, don't know whatever came of it. Nothing's been released. It is still an open investigation.
Yeah, I mean, Wade Wilson came forward 3 years after Lauren disappeared. And, here we are 2 years after that in 2025, still talking about this case. So it's an ongoing mystery.
Yeah, I mean, and it makes it murky when you have this person who is seemingly totally unconnected to the case coming forward. Is he
Right.
telling the truth? Is he trying to cut a deal? Is he trying to stir up chaos? We don't know. But we do know that this twist definitely injected new energy into the case. And so for that, I guess it was beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, you always want to make sure people don't forget about these victims. I think with cold cases, with missing persons especially, it's easy to say, well, we don't even know if a crime was committed, or, we don't know, maybe they're not dead. There's all sorts of ways to say um that there might, this might not be a murder. But if you have someone coming forward saying, a kid, someone accused of other murders saying that it was a murder, well, that's going to get people's attention.
It absolutely will. So that's sort of the latest twist in the
Yeah.
case. I anticipate more because, that has sort of been the nature of this the whole time. But let's talk about where things stand today.
Yes. So 5 years later, we're still asking, where is Lauren Dumolo? We've heard the theories, we've seen the headlines, we've chased the tips, and yet her story remains unfinished.
Yeah, the case is still open. There have been no arrests, no public persons of interest. And most terrible of all, no confirmed sightings of her, like no trace of Lauren herself.
Yes. So, the new lead detective is really the family's biggest hope right now and is still working the case.
Yeah, and sadly, Joe Fanciulli, who we mentioned earlier, he from Missing in America, and he helped re-energize the case. He's also since passed away of natural causes.
Yeah.
He was older, but his work on Lauren's case and so many others really left a mark.
Yes, absolutely. There's still a reward for information on Lauren's disappearance, and it's an open investigation. So the case, is still alive, but just barely. It needs momentum. It needs something, new. It needs answers.
Yeah, even 5 years later, someone out there has to know what happened. Someone saw something, someone heard something. No tip is too small. So if that person is you, or you think you might know something, you can still submit a tip. You can do it anonymously. Just call Cape Coral Police Department or reach out to us through our website, justicepending.com, and we'll help make sure it gets to the right people.
This case has gone on for 5 years, but no one is giving up.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Justice Pending. And if you have a case you'd like us to cover, please drop us a line on our website, justicepending.com.
And as always, stay safe, stay alert, and keep asking questions.